I posted up here. I can't see because.
Okay. I'm going to zoom a little bit on the sides anyway. All right, so one of the things we have a kind of like with the register, there's a login stored procedure. Again, if you guys ever want to see those, I will show them to you if you want. They're just SQL. The login procedure, what it does, if they when they enter their username and password, and in Community Assist, their username is their email, right? So the username is always the email. And the password, if you want to use an existing password, is always their last name, pass. Just concatenate it together. Whatever their last name is, plus the word pass. But they actually do have a username in Book Review. But it takes their username and password, and it hashes the new password. It pulls up the password from the database and sees if they match. And kind of like the other one, it returns a 1 if it succeeds and a -1 if it fails. So I think, are we ready to start? I've got the video going. Let me maximize. And then I'm going to zoom for a moment just to look over to the side. I have, for whatever reason today, a lot of arthritis. I guess I'm getting old.
Everybody does.
So we can use we really don't need any. Well, actually, we do need it. I'm going to make another model, just another model class, one for login. And really, it only needs 2 fields. And I could do this without a login class. I just think it's easier to pass things around as classes. So I'm going to add a model, which is the login class. You want me to zoom to 200 for this, or can you see it? It's kind of, I'll zoom up one more. So over here, under models, I'm just going to right-click, and I'm going to add a class. And I'm going to name that class once it gets there. So somewhere on this, there it is. So we want a class. And at the bottom, I'm just going to call it, I'm going to call it login class. I don't want to call it just login. And there's a reason, basically because login is a reserved word in a lot of contexts. So I'm going to call it login class. And I'm going to add it. And then I'm going to unzoom for a minute, because zooming is a pain. All right. So we only need 2 things in this login class. And as I said, there are ways you can pass strings, so we could do it without this. But I'm going to, what do you think the fields are that we need?
Username?
Yeah, username. And we need string, right? It's just a string.
Mm-hmm.
And set and get. And then we need their password. And this is not the password that's stored in the database. We want the plain text password. So I'm going to do another public string. I'll do password, which is also a reserved word, but it's pretty good at context. I'm going to do set and get. That's actually all there is to this class. It's just a way to bundle the username and password together so we can pass it as one thing. One of the problems in general with, this is true of programming languages in general, is you can only pass one thing out of a method. So if you want to pass a complex or multiple things, you either have to store it as some kind of object or in an array or something like that, because you can only pass one thing out. That one thing could be complicated, but you can only pass one thing out. So this is our thing to pass out. So we've got our little data class called login class. So are we okay so far? This is actually going to be kind of easy. Just as soon as I say that, we'll run into problems.
From yours too, does the naming rule violation for login class matter? Like, I think
Oh.
Is that going to cause problems?
It will not cause problems, but we should probably name it login class.
And just changing it there will.
Just changing it there will change it. Here's something that can get you into trouble. All right, so if I change it here, it actually changes the name of the class. It doesn't necessarily change, like over here, it may still be, I don't see it over there. There it is, with the lowercase l. The file name, this is the file name. This is the class name. Unlike Java, they don't have to match. Does that make sense? So one of the things that can get you into trouble is if you change something over here, it doesn't necessarily change what's in here. And so you think it's one thing and it's a different thing. So I could rename this over here too if I want. But you have to do them separately. They're not the same thing. The other thing about renaming is that once you get going, certain things you can rename okay, and other things, if you rename them, they're going to ruin you.
Why do they choose to have it separate so the class name is equal to the name of your constructor?
Well, partially because, well, the class name is the same as the constructor. It's just it's the file name.
Yeah, the file name.
Microsoft allows you to do things in a file that you can't do in Java. For instance, one file can have multiple classes. One physical file can have multiple classes. You can't do that in Java. Every class has to have its own file. So, I mean, you could write, you literally can put just dozens of classes in a single file. So that's why the file name is separate from I think that's the main reason. Some of these things, if you change the name of, like changing the name of your project, will ruin you. It'll never work again. Just to let you know. Now, it is possible you could fix it, but it's not worth it. It's better to start over.
It's written so many different places.
It's written so many different places. And one of the problems, there's another thing here. When you do, there's a replace, right? So you can go through and replace it, and it will replace it everywhere in the C# code. But it won't replace it in the JavaScript. It won't replace it in the HTML. It won't replace it in the Razor, right? It just change the name of the project and you might as well just start over. Changing the name of your model is similar. It'll just mess you up. As I said, it is possible to debug it. All the code is there in different places, but it could take literally hours to fix, whereas, again, just rerunning it could take minutes. So the main two things I want to say about naming. One is when you create it, name it, and don't rename it unless you really have to. Two, don't name two things the same thing. This happens a lot. You create your own class called, say, review. There's a class in there that's already called review. The conflict will make it so nothing quite works because it'll just be confused, right? Never name two things the same thing. Computers aren't smart enough necessarily to figure out which is which. And they'll always go for the local instance over the way they handle resolve it is that the local instance always has precedence over the more distant, higher level one. But that's often not the case that you want, and particularly in this environment. So just be careful of that. I will, not that it matters, but I'm going to rename the file also with a capital L. That being said, the naming convention will not affect how it behaves. I think Java has the same naming convention, right? Classes are capitalized. Is that true? Anyone taking Java? You're taking Java.
Yeah.
Class names are capitalized, right, in Java?
Yes.
Variable names are not, which is true also in C#. The difference is that method names are capitalized in C# and not in Java. But again, it's just a convention. You can do whatever you want. But consistency is useful. All right, so that's all we need to do with the model. This is just a thing to store. One of the other things that I'm not sure is clear, because I've had people ask this class has no connection with the database, right? It's really just there to capture things that we put in our form, and then we'll pass it to a stored procedure, which will then write it to the database. But this class has no direct contact to the database. Like our person class that we did, our new person class, has no connection to the database. Those fields are not going to populate any way at all, except when you write from the text boxes from the form to them. The stored procedure then takes those fields, puts some of them in person and some in person address, right? And it also hashes the password and things like that. All right, so let's go to controllers. So I'm not going to maximize this, but basically I'm on the controller folder, and I'm going to do add, and I'm going to add a controller. So generally, you either use the model that's there. So the model is always the starting place. The next place to go is the controller. And so I'm just going to add a new controller. And like the other one, do you need this zoomed a little? I guess I could zoom. We're going to do an empty controller.
We don't need any constructor here.
You don't need a constructor on the login class. You could add one if you want. I'm going to call this the login controller. And again, the name here matters because it's going to create a folder with views. The folder will be called login. So the naming for a controller is always whatever it is you're controlling plus the word controller. It will actually work if you let it, don't do controller, but it'll get confused later. So that's a naming convention that actually it uses in its structure. So I'm going to add that. And it takes forever online. Come on. It does two things. It creates an empty controller, which we've got now, with an index. And again, you don't have to leave that as index, but whatever you name it is what the view has to be named. And the other thing before I scale down is that under views, there is now a login folder. Don't know if you can see it. It's empty, but there's a login folder. Every controller creates a folder for the views that go with it. When you make, if you guys have done much web development, it's fairly typical that if you create subsections, each subsection has an index in it, right? So that if you do a URL, you don't have to do, you can just go to the folder name and it'll launch the index. And I think that's the idea behind having an index as the first one here. So I'm going to zoom down. So I'm going to leave it as index, although you certainly could change it, as I said, if you want. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it this exactly the way it is, right? Because we need an empty method basically just to show the form, right, without doing anything. I do want to do one thing up here. Two things, maybe. I'm going to do using And the name of my project, which is Book Review Spring 18. And then models, right? So we need a reference to the models. And don't have to do this at class level, but I will. I'm going to do the book review data entities, DB entities. We typically need in a constructor, any constructor that's actually dealing, I mean, not constructor, any controller that's actually dealing with the model is probably going to have to touch the entities. You don't act, so the models that you add, like per new person and stuff, they're not actually in the entities. That's just the ones that were generated from the database. If this isn't there, couple of things. If you've ran it more than once, it might be book review database entities 1. Right? Every time you run it, it re-enumerates. You can clear that out in the config file if you prefer. But the other thing is, if it's not there, sometimes restarting it, it'll come back. Restarting Visual Studio. And if that fails, you may just want to delete your entities and run that wizard. It's easier than fixing it, generally. Okay, so I'm going to do another index. And this index will be for the receiving the form. So, guys, remember what you need to do? Well, first we need to get the post, right? We need to tell it that it's going to post. You could do get if you prefer. Post is slightly more private, and there's a whole level of this where we could talk about whether, because even if it's post, it's interceptable, right? Some of the data, so your security could be an issue with some of this. And then validate anti-forgery token. I still haven't decided if that's required, but it's always there, so I haven't taken it out. And then I'm just going to do public action result index, and I'm going to do a square bracket bind equals parentheses include actually, so it's include, is there a parentheses here? Is it like this? I'm trying to remember the syntax of this. All right, I'm going to go check real quick. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to go, we did the register. So let me look at the register. I'm just going to look at the register controller. So it's bind parentheses include equal. Okay. So let's go back to our login controller. So it's just a parentheses here, not equal. Include is as a capital I. Equals, and then I'm just going to do, in our login class, it was what, username? And I think I just did username password, right? And I'm going to check on that in a second. And then outside, actually, is it inside? It's outside, I think. I'm going to do this as a login class. and I'm going to give it a local name of LC. And then I'm going to do curly braces. Now the thing I want to check on is that if I've spelled username, if I did that right. So I'm going to look at my model. I'm going to look at login class, which is way up here. And I just want to make sure that the caps are right. So I did username, password. That is correct. So that's good. So what this bind does, this is an alternate way to define a class. You're defining it and assigning values to its setters and getters at the same moment. It's weird to me that these are just strings, right? Because it will pass in what, from the form, you'll get the username and password, and it'll map them to these. And if they're spelled at all differently, it'll fail. and it's case sensitive too. So the idea that it's in a string is a little weird to me, but that's how they do it. So we're creating an instance of the login class that has these values bound to it. And then this is our local variable for that. And I tend to be real brief on that because we have to use it a few times. Does that make sense, sort of? I don't know anything equivalent in Java. There may be a way to bind like that. Yeah. I've been playing with Java again lately, so. Let me do, so what we want is we're going to do int, and I kind of always want to say result, but let's just do R. R is not a good variable name, by the way, because it means nothing, but we have a form called result, so I hate to call this result. Anybody have a better name?
Results. The next.
We could do that. So we're going to get the value from, and DB, right, our book review database entities. And in there is, at the very bottom of the IntelliSense, USP reviewer login. Okay. And it's going to take two arguments, which are the reviewer username and the reviewer password. So I'm just going to do LC dot username, comma, LC dot password. All right, so we're just passing those things in. It's going to return a -1 or a 1. -1 if it fails, -1 if it succeeds. I tried really hard to get it to return something else because we're going to do a query right now to get the user, the reviewer key, their number, because we want to put that in a session variable so that we have that. And I'll show you in a moment. But I wanted the stored procedure to return that number rather than have to go look for it now. But it won't. It just returns -1 instead. A -1 or 1, actually. So I'm going to say if results not equal -1. And you could reverse this if you want. You could say if review equals 1, which might actually be more efficient. Sometimes it's more efficient to look for equality than non-equality. Does that make sense? So you could reverse it if you want, but I'll do them if it's not equal to -1. That is, if it is good, then I'm going to do a search for the person key. So I'm going to do var pk, oops, equals, and you probably have never seen anything quite like this, but I'm going to do from R in db.reviewers. Where R dot reviewer username, which is at the bottom. Actually, instead of dot equal, let's do equals. And it should capitalize, yeah. Where it equals lc dot username. So what we want to do is where the username in the database basically equals the username that we've just passed in. Select r dot reviewer key. And I'm going to add a parentheses here. I'm going to add a parentheses here. And I'm going to do dot first or default. And then a semicolon. First or default, what it does is it says just return a single value. Sure.
Yeah, and what would it be reviewers for the community assist? Would it be the people or
A person. It will be people. It'll be plural. Yeah, people. And then they don't have a username, so it'd be email, right? But you'd want the person key. And the name of the I think it's just USP login. It's not USP review login. So this is, anybody ever seen anything like this? This is called LINQ. It's a query language that Microsoft developed for C#. It basically looks like an upside down SQL, right? And for those that are doing SQL, it actually is the order in which SQL is actually processed. So it does the from first. It figures out what the table is. Then it figures out the criteria. And then it selects whatever you want from that, right? So when you write an SQL statement, you're actually kind of writing it upside down in terms of the way it's processed. But this is how it's actually processed. The dot first, and one of the reasons why they did this, and it isn't for SQL only, you can query arrays, you can query XML, you can query lots of different things. But this query language is debuggable, right? It gives you compiler, it's compilable errors, because in the typical thing, SQL is just in a string, and there's no error trapping in it, basically. The only way you know if it fails is if the database throws back in it. So this is something that you can get things for. var because it returns a complex type, right? Whatever the database is with all the types for its different columns.
End of parentheses after reviewer.
Yes, and one starting with the from. So that's because I'm saying for this query, we want to just do first or default. We just want to return one value. There should only be a single value there. And the reason I want to do that is so I don't have to loop through the results to find the match. Even if there's only one result, if you don't do first or default, it'll assume there's a set, and you'd have to loop through it even if it's just a single. So I don't want to loop. So because we're doing single or default, I can say, actually I'm going to declare this up above here. I'm going to call it review key. Actually, we could just call it R key, or reviewer key, review key. And I'm going to say it equals 0 initially. And I'm declaring it up there because I'll need to use it in a couple of places. So one of the next things I got to do is I'm going to say that the review key, and I probably should capitalize that K, equals int pk, p key.
Nice.
Does anybody know what that line does? It's okay if you don't, I'm just curious. We're casting pk as a var, which is a complex type, but it's actually only returning one value, which is an integer. We're casting it to an integer so that we can store it in review key. Does that make sense? So I'm going to create a session variable. I'll call it reviewer key. Capitalization is up to you, but it is crucial that when you use it in the future, you remember. And I'm going to say it equals rev with a capital K. All right, so a session variable. Do you guys know what a session variable is from other? With databases, if you want to store a variable, particularly if it's going to cross pages, there's only two ways to do it. You have to have a session level variable, which goes back to the server, or you have to create a cookie. All right. So this is a session variable that goes back to the server, and we can access it as long as the same IP basically is in touch with the page. It's all one session. So that particular session can have, we can refer to the reviewer key. Once they've navigated off the page and come back, then they have to, it might be a timeout thing, but eventually they probably have to relog in. The other option is to put it on a cookie on their machine. All right, and you could do that, but we're going to do the review, the session key. So we're doing this because later we want to know if they're logged in or not. So one of the things that we can do is at the top of the page, we can test whether this session key is present. If the session key is not present, if this session isn't really present, then we throw them back to the login. Yeah.
So my rev key is shown as a local variable because it's inside of the if statement.
Right, so that's why I declared it outside the if.
Yeah, I did on mine, and it's still saying that the one inside is not within security contents.
I think that this is capital. One's capitalized. So one of the neat and bad things about case sensitivity is that if you have a lowercase key here, it's a different variable than it is up there. And I'm, as I said, I'm inconsistent. I'm trying to be consistent, but I'm inconsistent, which is not good. So basically what we've got is we've done the login. If it matches, we're going to look up the reviewer key so we can store it in a session variable and prove that they're logged in later. And then I am going to create a message. Right, remember our message class that we made before? Mine has, well, so actually I might want to even though I think instead of declaring it here, we could, but I think I'm going to declare it up above also, kind of like up here. I'm going to make it equal to null initially. So down here, I will say msg.messageText equals welcome, comma, and do we want to do like their username again? So let's do plus username. This is essentially the same message we used when they logged in, right? So I'll do plus rc.username. Whoa, it's LC. LC.username.
Else.
Okay. So all this is if it's good. So I'm going to do an else. And we'll just, for that, we'll just do a message.messageText. Invalid login, I guess. It's a bit of a pain, and it might be better to return back to the login page. I'm going to cast them away, and then we can make a link back if we want. Why does it not like message text? Oh, that's because it's not parentheses. It's equal. All right, and then at the end, we need to return. So we're going to return view result, which in quotes, and in comma message. Now this is under shared, but I still in this thing I should do public action result. Result, and it takes in a message object. And then in the view, return view. Okay. Now I did my result under the shared folder. So way down here under shared. So I won't have to create that view again.
If you wanted to go back to, if you did the invalid login.
And you wanted to go back.
Would you just recursively call the method again?
So there's a couple of things you could do. You could, instead of return view result, and that won't work because of the lowercase r. Instead of return the view result, you could just return view. And one of the things you could do is instead of passing a message here, because if you just return view and don't give it a name, it'll return the login view again. And you could write in here, instead of a message, you could do view bag. View bag is a place where you can store text and stuff you want to display on the web page that isn't part of the model, basically. And then you could do, you could display the text that way. You'd have like a p tag underneath the form or something, and we could display the message. You want to try that?
No, I'm just curious.
But yes, you could do that, and that actually might be a better route, because this way, what I would probably, they would have to click back to login, which is a bit of a pain. One of the things I don't claim about this app that I'm having you build, I do not claim it's the best layout. If you look at it in terms of a user experience, it's probably pretty crappy. I'm just trying to show you the different pieces. It would need a lot of work to get it to be a nice user-friendly app. So this actually should be all that we need to do with the controller. Are there any questions? The one weird thing, I guess, is this search and then the session variable. That's the new part. And that's only because I could never get the store procedure to return their actual user number. It's also good for you to see link. So you can search. I mean, it's actually a very powerful search language that you can use. Did you need to see something more? Does it need to go up or something?
Yeah.
The session has square brackets. Is that anything? I could take a look real quick. The session is essentially an array of session variables. I would do it outside the.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if I want to be one of the controller, can I just delete it?
Oh yeah, so you just right.
Don't do it.
Just hit that thing.
Then and delete the folder and just.
Oh no, not the folder, just the file itself.
Well, what will happen if it's okay to
I
delete one?
I would not delete the folder.
No.
Only in the individual file. You have to recreate it, okay?
But yeah, when we create a new controller, it automatically give us a folder. With this one dispense, one gonna delete one of the controller.
Oh, it will create also a.
It
creates one for the login, so. But it's empty, so if you recreate it again, you can delete that one as well.
Did the system give you with just the folder when you create it, with just the controller?
Yeah, it'll give you a view folder automatically.
When you have file in there, we also delete that.
Right, so you'd have to recreate it. So I would not actually. So I would maybe delete this.
So I'm going to build, although I don't need to. Building is a way of saving. And it also will tell you if you screwed up on anything.
Yeah, I screwed up.
So the next things are basically all that's left to do is to create a form.
For the view?
Yeah. So we're going to do the view, the index view, and create a form. We don't even have to create the result form because it already exists. So just an index view. Are we ready? It won't run now. It won't run without the form. I kind of wish that it would. It will build. You can build it. But it won't run until you actually have the view in place. So I'm making it bigger. I'm going to go over here to views, and I'm going to go to login, right click, add, view. Okay, and I want the view's name to be index. Remember, it's really important that the view name matches the name of the method. If you named your method login, then you'd have to name your view login. Right? They have to have exactly the same name. So I'm going to do add. And we get our view. All right. So the first thing we need to do is what? That's right, add the model. And we want our basically our project name. So mine's book review spring 18 dot models dot message. No, not message. Login. Login class. We don't need IEnumerable because we're not looping through anything, right? We're just going to be doing. Now, we could try to type this in, but I still won't think I'm going to just go to like the register. Or we do create on books. There weren't very many of those. I'm just going to steal one of these forms, right? I'm going to steal from the beginning begin form all the way down to the end of the page. And I'm going to cut some of them out because I don't need everything. Good. So you could do this with register, or you could do it with the one like the one you did was business rules, right, with the thing. So I'm going to go back to my new index, and I'm just going to paste that. And we only need 2 fields, and I have 3 here, but if you did register, you might have a whole bunch of fields you don't need, but you only need 2 of them. And one of them will be username. And then everywhere in here, you just change that to username. I used to do these by scratch, and I make so many mistakes. It's just so easy, much easier to paste it. All right, and then the next one is password. And there is a thing I'll show you if you want. Where it says editor for, label for. There, you can change it to a password mode. If I can remember how to do that. The problem being, whoa, not like that. So I think I'm just going to try the dot here. Password for. You can do password for instead of editor for. If you do that, your password will be masked. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I'll do quickie zoom on that. So where it says editor for here for the password, you could replace that with password for, and it will mask it if you want. I'm not going to because I can't remember my passwords that well. But when in real life you'd want to mask that, right? So that it would have the dots rather than the plain text. That's actually all I have to do with this. Couple things that are important with this. It's really important that you get the begin HTML form with the curly brace and get the end curly brace. I haven't really determined for sure whether you need this curly brace I mean, you do need the curly brace, but whether you need the script section. I do know that we don't need back to list. If you want to get rid of that, yours may not have that if you did your registration one. Okay, so I think we can run. So I'm going to run this, see if it works. Cooking downstairs.
I love it.
Put a, so let's go back, put a parenthesis right in front of from. Yes, right, start a parenthesis there, that'll kill that one. Zero. It's okay. Now username, lower the end. Lower the, that's very specific. Yeah. Well, so it's what the class, notice that,
here.
yeah. Now, is that matching the actual what you have in the class? Let's look at.
You have to put the numbers in, that's not whatever.
Oh, you need a password on too. Use public strings. Yeah, password. And then do separate. Okay, so let's go back to your controller now.
Something.
And it should be. And that made that happy. Okay. So there's our login. It looks pretty good. I might change the name of the button from create to. To do that, I'll show you in a moment. So let's log in. Except, do you guys know of anybody? I don't remember anybody that's in the database.
And Fraggle.
Oh, just click on the database tables.
Yeah, I could do that, or I could just do another register real quick. So let's do something easy. I'm going to register and then log in because I don't remember who's in the database.
J. Smith.
Yeah, we could do J. Smith. So let's just say Jason Smith. And I'll just do J. Smith at Gmail. And I'm going to do just Smith Pass, although there might be more than one of those. All right, so I create that. Okay, so now I have to go to login. I'm changing the URL to login because we didn't add that yet to the. Yeah. So J. Smith Pass. If I click that, it should take me to the result page, except I'm getting an error. So what thing is not set to a instance? Message was null. Oh, I know why. It has nothing to do with the login. I misread you here for null. It should be message equals new message. This is in the constructor. When I initialized the message, I made it null. The message text could be null, but the message can't be. It has to be made new. So we're writing up here, instead of message equals null, it should be message equals new message. I was thinking of like a string or something. I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. I don't have to register again because I remember that person, so I'll do the login. So I'll just run from the login one. What? All right. So I'm going to do the JSmith and the Smith pass. When I click on that, it takes me welcome JSmith, so it worked. One of the tricks is to see now if I go back and we'll do JSmith, but let's do a bad password. Instead of Smith pass, let's do John pass or something that isn't a password. Invalid login. So it works. Okay. So I'm going to do a couple of little things, and then we'll call it good. So I guess I'll just... So I'm going to stop it. One of the things I'm going to do is instead of create, I'm going to go down here in the form and change it to login or submit, whatever you want to name it. That's naming the button. Way down at the bottom of the index form, this last div after the fields is the button, and the value login, that's going to be the text rather than create. And then I'm going to go to the shared layout, and I'm going to add the login here too. One of the things you could do if you were being fancy is after the registration, instead of forwarding them to the result page, we could forward them to the login page. And one of the things I didn't do in this whole assignment, we should probably at some point talk about and the logging out. You would just set the session variable to null. So login index and then the controller is login, or the folder is login. Oh, I did a single quote there. It needs to be a double quote. That should work. So I'm going to just run it from here to test that, and then I will do one last thing, and we'll call it good. And then you guys can either work on it, or I probably will get some time to work on it on Thursday too, depending on how things are going. So if I go to login now, it goes to login. Register. Books. Then I haven't done anything with the contact or the about. And then this is home. So the last thing I was going to do is I'm going to go to the register. You don't have to do this. This isn't on any assignment. I'm going to actually go to the register controller, where it says return welcome. You could instead, if you want, let's just comment that. So return view login. And then I need to, and is that a capital L? That should have quotes. Now I think there's another word I want in there. Return, is it result view? There's a word I want in there. I'm going to look under the one we created. It's not there. Controller is what I need. Redirect to action. That's what I want.
What do you have to do right now?
So I'm back in the register controller. This is not part of any assignment, but I'm just trying to say here, instead of going to the message to take them when they register, to take them to the login. So there's a word I was trying to redirect to action is what I want. So we're passing it to the login page. So once they registered, instead of going to the message saying welcome, it'll take them to the login page. So let's see if that works. This, as I said, is just playing right now, just to see, because I think it would make more sense to go to the login page after you register than to the message page. So let's go to, let's just run it from, actually I have no idea where it'll come from here, whether it'll run to the register or just go to the home page. I think it's just going to go to the home page. So I'll do register. I'll register another person. I have no idea. So Mark Newton. Actually, what was that show that was, oh, well, never mind. It was a cartoon. I'm just seeing if it'll redirect. I thought I didn't change the thing on the, whoa, it didn't pass it. So what is the path? Do I need a path to it? We will try again. It would be a capital I. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to real quickly All right, let's just leave it the way it is for right now. That looks complicated. I'll have to look it up. I think I've done that before and it worked, but I think it wants to know the controller and the wonder actually. So let's do one last try. Can I do login, comma, index? Seems happy with that, but I don't know if that'll work. So I need to think of a new person.
Henceforth,
I think that's the problem.
I know.
Probably leave on it, so. Oh, this is the register. This is the,
register.
that's the register. She's just trying to do something, so
No, it didn't work.
don't do anything with it. He's logging.
So I'll have to look into see what it takes to pass. Just ignore that
Don't do
and
anything with register control.
go to the message. I'll have to look and see how you get there. So we'll just leave it the way it is and just pass the message on. So I'm essentially done for today. I'm going to post it on GitHub right now. I'll just call this the logging commit. And we will commit and push. Does anybody know how Eclipse does the does the GitHub stuff? I was trying to play with it and I can't figure it out, but I'll figure it out eventually. So I'm gonna go look and make sure it went, because I am not a trusting sort with these.
Exactly here, the ones that Jay Stein did probably know.
Yeah. They might know how to do the GitHub and
They're close.
Have a look at
I
that.
got a question for you when you're done.
okay. I'll be right there. I just want to make sure. So we should have a new login controller. And it is all there. Interesting. Okay. The register controller should have been commented out. Yep. It's all there and it's all current.
Okay, so whenever I create a new person, or a person, even if I have to write credentials that says it's not a login, then I'm not getting the right return.
So let's look at a couple. Let's look at
I get
results not equal minus. Now, one of the things that we do is let's look at the register. So let's put it there. I think it might be. So you're using
site, yeah.
So let's look at the
catering company.
So we got register last name, first name, and round cost. So that's where we have to the order thing, versus the order what we got. Last night, first thing, and then the next one should be. So what's happening with your phone? And
When you
and
Password.
add register controller, you create a new controller as empty. Or
Yeah, empty.
I deleted, I will create a serial can press the cross.
Oh, you're trying, okay, let me go back. Right, you did. His register.
Yeah. Now, Steve has code on the
I
GitHub.
knew that because I've seen
I can
that.
just grab it. App controller.
Right. So this is, so is this, did you copy this into? This is the table. What we really want for the new form is more, like the business we would create. So you've only got one text, so you double that. So if you move that, which you currently log Do you have a form to log in? I don't see it in the folder to log in. Did you create a login folder?
View.
Well, that's for registration. And I think you have a new person. Right, but what you need to do is create a new controller with login. You might need to create that login class too. Yeah, you have, well, the login history is actually a filter thing. So add class. And I call it login class. I mean, what you want in there is two fields, username and so public.
Oh, you mean for upload?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's almost identical, but we just did it. Everyone else okay?
Is there a way I can move it back?
It's on the. I'll be over there in a moment.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, happy.
Go for register. My
Login.
login better. So I'm logging in.
I'm still including, because I'm gonna be higher than stuff. My entity is not connecting. So I right click the model, add the new ADO entity.
Okay, so yeah, so
You have a.
Oh, I think that is happening.
I mean, it works.
Now it's good. And you put like this.
It's not designed the same way that I do. I'm trying to be
like for me, my works. Yeah. Like for me,
So everything in there was
I
equal.
didn't actually.
I've got some errors here on the login control.
Did you make the login class?
I did do it.
So in the models, we added a class login.
Oh, that's what you Hold on.
And that basically just has two fields in it, username and password.
Okay.
Oh, it's something like that. So login, index, login. That actually looks good, but get rid of the dot in action link.
Oh.
And then that might be all you need.
Do I need
No,
all?
no, so if you have to.
They don't have to do
You have to
that.
make sure they do whatever, you name.
Yeah, that's what I did.
This is crazy.
And then it should click on login, it should go there. So it doesn't like.
Okay.
What is it that does this? View shared. The view index of the master was not found. So we said login index.
One of the things that, again, so as it doesn't matter what order.
Click over here, you
As
have
long
the
as-
login. You didn't-
As
Where did you
long
put your
as
index?
when you did this.
That's as aggressive.
Did you create an index view for the login?
Well, we're the
Hey,
two minutes.
Under view.
But it should be under login. Under login. Do you have another index somewhere? No, that should be. I'm just looking to see if. Doesn't look like it's in the. No, that's not right.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. I'm just seeing what This should be there, but this should have a time layout. Let's look at this. This is it. There. So let's, and put it in login.
Can I see your login class?
Index goes under to.
And we need to change the. That needs to be, index. That is kind of And you guys can change this to index.
Oh, so
Alright,
that's
so-
only, that's only.
Here it's
Got to
index,
split the
right?
line.
Add one more thing to this. Do public action result. Result. So action result with capital R. And then result. Space result. Open parentheses. And then inside of it, write message.
Follow that order. It
And then space, SG. And then let's do curly braces here. Open and close. That's okay. And then do return to
I feel like last year they did a really good job.
2 words. That will be. And then in parentheses. Put the just view in parentheses. And inside of that, do a message. And then a semicolon. Outside the parentheses. Because I'm thinking it'll give us an error. I just put it here, just to add one more. So just put it in. Okay, close and curve. There you go. This needs a capital. And I think it'll work. So let's go back. Just run it again and see if it works. It's just, the view has to be inside the folder. That goes with the control. And we put it in. So click on why do they not find it there? Alright, so let's look at it again.
Like, I'm not gonna see jail time.
There it is, and better. And look at the window. Why are you putting it like it's
Your diary.
The others don't have a layout index, so let's get rid of that.
When there's no music class, I'm not gonna think twice about it. On it right now. No, I'm not.
Yes.
I just want to wonder what that student did that caused them to like go on the screen.
So that word,
He had to.
let's go back to,
He had to be able to call it. Yeah, I just told that. It'll be a great line.
let's go back to login. So I think it's working.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I don't know if she's changed it now. Are you guys doing okay?
I was trying to help him debug, but
I'm getting it here. So in your result, the resource came out. So let's look under your folders.
We were just trying to go through all of the.
So let's look under reviews. Go down here, under share, there's your resource.
And then he was going on is it supposed to be called controller or? Is that?
It doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. So you have a register. It wasn't going to the controller with,
Good.
we don't really want to do it. Let's just try it.
You probably go back here and respond to everybody's posts.
This should work.
What? Go library to watch games and get info for money.
Right, so this may be the problem.
Also, there are two
Right.
the ones that make close.
Yeah, you have to be careful with that. So let's look at this one. Yes. Look at the view.
Hey Steve, is lab gonna be, is Thursday just gonna be lab?
I think so. We'll see. I mean, if everybody's turned it in before then, I might do something more, but probably, I'm assuming it's not. So, how do we use? Right, but I think, we'll go back to. And don't necessarily need. This should work. So, well, let's do, let's picture something. So do register. And the result. So everything was working, it's just missing that 3 days.
Wow. And other than putting it on the menu bar up there, it's done, right?
Yeah. So let me do, let me stop the video. Because it's got a dead spot at the end now.
So